Hi there from Chicago. Mike Hall here. Glad to have you with us on Big Ten Today, presented by CDW. Got a busy hour of basketball coming your way. Tons on the women's side, including, once again, the great Brenda Frese on our show to talk about their team and the huge amount of injuries they've had to overcome. But we start off by bringing in our buddy Andy Katz, who once again joins us from a faraway land. Are you like ultra mega platinum status on the airlines? You're once again on the road, and then once again tomorrow night you'll be back with me here in Chicago.
That's right, but I've done a great job of diversifying among multiple airlines so that I can get status on various ones. You know, you tease Brenda Frese. I talked to her earlier here in College Park, and she was thrilled knowing that she'd be joining you later this hour.
It's not a competition, but yes, she's thrilled to join me, and my questions will be better than the ones you asked her. Anyways, let's get to our big story of the day, and that is looking back at what happened last night in the world of Big Ten men's basketball. Northwestern beat Minnesota. Martinelli had 29 points. Chris Collins, again, doing a great job coaching. He's lost two of his most important players, and now they've won back-to-back road games in the Big Ten. But we're not going to dive deep into that one. We're going to focus on the Wisconsin win and the Illinois win. We'll begin with the Badgers in particular, who took down Washington in a beatdown. John Blackwell had 19 points in the first half, ended up with 24 on the day. John Tonje had 13 points. And it's a win for Wisconsin. But, Andy, it's a win in a bounce-back fashion for them because the last time they played, they had a 15-point lead with 8 minutes to go in the game, and they lost it to Oregon. So it's nice for them to not only get back on track, but for them to feel really good about it in a dominant way.
Yeah, what I loved about what Greg Gard said after the game last night was that they were the aggressor from start to finish, and they controlled this game. And when you get to this point in the season, Mike, you've got to win the games you're supposed to win. And obviously, if you can steal road wins, that's great, and protect your home court. But this is one of these games. If Wisconsin wants to still try to potentially compete for the title or get that double bye or try to secure a number 3 or 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, this kind of game you cannot afford to lose at home against the last place team in the Big Ten. The one concern coming out of this game was Max Klesman. Didn't play in the second half. Greg Gard said after the game that re-injuring a lower leg injury. Hopefully it is nothing that's going to be any kind of serious situation that keeps him out. It was a blowout, so they didn't have to put him back in the game. But you brought up John Blackwell. What I thought was critical was Tonje was so good in that Oregon game and has been great, you know, kind of the way he was early in the season. He's back to doing that again, but he needs help. And Blackwell had done that. He needed to continue to do it, and he stepped up when they needed him against Washington.
It's not just about getting help. It's also about not hurting yourself. And in that game against Oregon, they had 17 turnovers. How great do you think Greg Gard felt about the fact they had 5 lost turnovers in this game?
Well, I mean, the good news is they were playing a team that wasn't going to necessarily turn you over. I think the concern is when they do face another team like Oregon that can pressure you a little bit more defensively, you know, how do they handle it? You know, they don't really have they've got great guard play, but not necessarily like a true point. And so they're going to obviously have to handle when they get pressure. They've done a great job of moving that basketball and ripping and running. I mean, they're scoring in a much higher clip than we've ever seen before from Wisconsin. And so if they can get ahead of the pressure, it's going to be a big plus for Wisconsin. But I still think this is a team you should buy stock in, whether it's in Indianapolis or in the NCAA tournament. They've got the pieces to go on a great run.
And they could turn some heads this Sunday. They got Michigan State, top 10 opponent coming their way. That is going to be another great Sunday afternoon Big Ten game coming up. The story of this one was their ability to bounce back. The other big game that stands out was Illinois getting a win, and they needed a bounce back so badly. That absolute destruction that they went through in New York felt like the type of thing that could maybe ruin the spirits of some. I know for the fans, sometimes it definitely felt like that. But they not only come back, they got a very comfortable 20-point win over Iowa.
So, Mike, I've had the pleasure of watching 2 of the worst Illinois losses that I can remember. A year ago, I was working the sideline for that 30-0. I'm kidding on the pleasure part. This was not pleasurable for the Illini fans. 30-0 run against UConn in the Elite Eight. I was there Saturday night and saw the 43-point loss to Duke. One common thread there was in the game against UConn, it took them a while before pounding in and against Donovan Clingan just wasn't going to work. And before they finally stopped the bleeding, they were shooting too many threes. They know it now against Duke. The runouts were happening, and it just steamrolled. And look, after the game, Brad Underwood was not upset about the effort. It was about the fight. He drew a distinction there. And obviously, he felt decently about their looks. They just weren't going in. This was a massive game, I thought, for them, for their confidence, overall attitude. And I was texting with Brad this morning about any changes. And what he said after the game last night, he was reiterating to me, was about how they knew they had to do something differently. And so they decided not to switch on the ball screens, and also feeling a little bit healthier for this game. And I know it was only a couple of days since the Duke loss, but that has helped, getting some practice time. And now they've got 2 games over we're on February 26th. So basically about 14 days before maybe they would play in the Big Ten tournament. And they've only got 2 games. So they got plenty of time. If they're going to tweak anything defensively, continue to get healthy, because that has been a problem for them. Like a lot of teams around the country where they've, battled illnesses or injuries. And this is a team that we know is so talented when they are clicking, when they can stay on the floor. So they desperately needed a win like this over Iowa.
Hey, real quick, Andy, you kind of started to touch on this, but I know how concerned Illini fans are, and they've heard the whole, well, we're not healthy and, well, we're not injured, and they're kind of done with those excuses. It makes sense to me. I still think they've got a much higher ceiling, and I don't think this is the floor, but what do you say to concerned Illinois fans?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the red flag to me is sometimes when they lose, and something has to change, I think, when it starts to steamroll. And as talented as they were a year ago with an NBA level talent in Terrence Shannon, and with this group that has NBA level talent as well, they've got to be able to just stop the bleeding, because that's been a problem the last 2 years, as good as they've been. And they won the Big Ten tournament last year, that there are times when it just starts to steamroll out of control, because they have the talent to get back into these games. But when you're suddenly down, by double figures against, elite teams, and that was the case certainly Saturday night, the case a year ago in the Elite Eight, it's almost too hard to come back from. So this, they would hope they'll be in this position again when, they're in the NCAA tournament, because the problem is their seeding has been hurt. And I will say this, Mike, they will be seeded to their record and their resume, not to their talent. And if they're in an 8-9 game and they win it, let's say hypothetically, there's no way a 1 seed's going to want to see Illinois.
Right.
Because if Illinois is at its best, they're a lot better than an 8-9. Yet that might be where they are. And suddenly a second round game against a 1 Alabama or a 1, they wouldn't play Duke again in the first round, but an Alabama, actually they play, I'm trying to blank on Auburn, Alabama, but let's say Houston. Houston's a better example. Still not a team that they'd want to face in that second round.
From Tuesday's results to Wednesday's potential, let's look ahead at the games coming your way tonight. There are 3 of them: Michigan State, Maryland on the Big Ten Network, Penn State, Indiana here, then Ohio State, USC. That's a triple header of games right here. And Andy, I want to start, of course, with the top 20 battle between the Spartans and the Terps. 2 ranked teams on our air. I think it's going to be so cool. And College Park might be the loudest we've heard it in a long time tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I was here. I've had the honor of being here, for a number of high-profile games over the years. I was here actually when Maryland won a piece of the Big Ten regular season title, literally a week before the world shut down. As you know, you and I were both in Indy that week in 2020. And then a couple years later, when they knocked off number 1 Purdue and there was a court storming, I will tell you, they're already preparing just in case if something like that were to happen tonight. Because this place is going to be rocking. The students are back. They're anticipating, absolute bonkers kind of crowd, because Maryland is arguably one of the hottest teams in the country, not just in the Big Ten. And I think there's so much at stake tonight, because for Michigan State, with the lead they have now in the Big Ten title race and who they've already beaten, beating Purdue, beating Michigan. I know they got another game against Michigan. But if they win tonight, I think they're going to win the Big Ten and win it by themselves. If they lose tonight, Maryland is probably the one team behind them that has a legit chance to catch them based on the remaining schedule. Now, they would need help. They would need Michigan State to lose one more game. Who knows? It could happen because Wisconsin comes in this weekend. They do go to Iowa, and they go, and then they get Michigan at home, and it's a rivalry game. You never know. So the chances are there they could lose one more. If they lose tonight, Maryland would have to obviously win out, which certainly could happen based on their remaining schedule. So there's a lot at stake. I also think that Michigan State enters here as a 2 in the bracket. Maryland probably a 3 or 4. So there's seed implications there, not just for the Big Ten tournament, but for the NCAA tournament. And it's just going to be great theater. It's going to be awesome that we're going to be televising this kind of game on the Big Ten Network. I'll be joined by Robbie Hummel and Jason Horowitz, and we can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And I think the great thing about Maryland, too, is the depth of guys who've made these big strides, right? Jacoby Gillespie has not only been clutch with important shots, but he scored 20 points in back-to-back games. Rodney Rice has had 18 or more in 4 of their last 5. They're getting a bunch of different guys. It's not just Derek Queen who's scoring for them.
Yeah, here's the thing, and this is the lesson learned for schools across the country about don't get caught up in where the transfer comes from or what numbers necessarily put out. Kevin Willard's done a phenomenal job when you think about his guard transfers of late. Jameer Young came from Charlotte. This is not Bobby Lutz's Charlotte. This was a Charlotte that was just kind of over the last couple of years. You got Belmont, Virginia Tech, and South Florida. Those are the 3 previous homes of the guards, Selton Miguel, Rodney Rice, and Jacoby Gillespie. None of those schools, are top 20 type teams or were in the previous year. And yet they perfectly have fit. They filled the void to join Julian Reese, the returning anchor inside, and then a top 5 freshman in Derek Queen. It's arguably one of the best starting 5s in the country. Now, depth is a major problem for them. We know that. I think it's more of a foul issue in terms of foul problems, not a fatigue issue, because once you get into the postseason, because of television, the timeouts are longer. And so especially if you're 18 to 22 years old, you're in good shape, you have more time to rest. So I don't think fatigue is the factor of playing 40 minutes. It's more of, can you just stay on the floor without getting into foul trouble?
Again, that game coming up on our air, 6:30 Eastern, 5:30 Central time, the beginning of 3 straight games.
Pre-game show at 6. Well, you'll hear me talk to Tom Izzo and Kevin Willard. We got to make sure we promote that pregame show. We have a lot of good interviews there.
I mean, we have the rest of the show for you to plug that, Andy. We'll get to it. We're turning off Andy's mic because we were supposed to go to break about 5 minutes ago, but whatever. Big Ten men's standings right now look like this. Remember, that first line, everybody above it gets a double bye. Between the yellow lines are those who would get a single bye. So there's still room to go. UCLA is alive in that hunt. So is Purdue. With that in mind, Andy, let's go through this right now. We want to ask you who will be the top 4 men's basketball tournament seeds. You did mention earlier, you think Michigan State's pretty much locked in there?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe if they win tonight, they're going to win this league outright based on the remaining schedule and their tiebreakers. If they lose, they may not win it or at least get a share. But I think Michigan State, that's your safe bet. Michigan State fans, I'd be shocked if you have to think about getting into Indy before Friday. Michigan still could fall, but I thought their win over Nebraska, as ugly as it was one of those games that sort of helped keep them in that group. I feel really confident that Maryland is going to be there as well. So that's 3. And, among the last 3 of Purdue, UCLA, and Wisconsin, I would say I'm leaning Wisconsin right now, even though they got to go to Michigan State this weekend. They have a favorable end of the schedule next week. UCLA has at Purdue, at Northwestern, before hosting USC. So a very difficult stretch for the Bruins. Purdue, which has lost 4 in a row, has already slid out of that double bye situation. So they have a little bit of a mountain to climb to get back into it. So you're putting me on the spot, and that's okay. I'm going to go with Michigan State, Michigan, Maryland, and Wisconsin in some order, getting the double bye.
Well, let's go down. You mentioned Purdue. I think that's an interesting story. They've been so good this year at many times. They've won the last couple regular season titles. What do you think has to change in these final 2 weeks for the Boilermakers?
Well, we can't dismiss that they had the National Player of the Year 2 years running in Zach Edey. And it wasn't just him offensively. Obviously, he just changed the entire game when he was on the floor. But also, I would not dismiss his leadership and, his presence, not just physically, but just the way he carried himself. I mean, I was around that team a lot the last couple of years, and it was Zach Edey's team, as it should have been. And he was just a dominating presence. And as good as Braden Smith is, and has definitely increased his leadership role, and Trey Kaufman-Renn, I think, has done a much better job. And I'm not around the team, obviously, as much as I was a year ago. But that's just my outside view, that the leadership has not been as consistent. They don't have as many. I mean, not having Edey, I think, was, obviously that's a given. But the other problem is some of the rotation guys, just haven't stepped up the way they did a year ago. Obviously Lance Jones, Mason Gillis, those are two players that were major factors in the title run a year ago. And whether it's Colvin or Heidi, I mean, they just haven't taken that next step up. Obviously, Cox has been pretty good for the most part. So I think that little piece has been missing. And maybe they were given the benefit of the doubt by being picked to win it in the preseason with Indiana, if I'm not mistaken. But maybe they are settling back to where probably they should be, which is, in that upper tier, in that top six, but maybe it's six, in the Big Ten.
What about UCLA? That's another one you said right now you probably wouldn't have them in. What do you think they have to do in these final 2 weeks to get in that double bye position?
Got to win. I mean, they just took on some water earlier in the season that put them in this position. They're certainly talented enough to be a top 4 team in this league. But, remember, they lost at Maryland. They lost at Illinois. They lost at Nebraska, at Rutgers. So those losses early put them in a hole. And, they're still trying to climb out of it. They had the home loss to Michigan and then the just bizarre home loss to Minnesota. So, I mean, especially the Minnesota loss, had that not occurred, they definitely would be in a much better position right now to get that double bye. And the schedule's going to be tough. Excuse me. You want to Purdue, and then Northwestern, which now suddenly is playing really well. And then you end with USC.
Your memory blows me away, by the way. Your ability to remember losses and wins, to remember who's coming up next. Like, I have notes in front of me, and I still have to look down every once in a while. Are you just making it up and assuming I won't call you on it?
No, I could remember the first time we met. I think it was in Bristol, if not Charlotte. And so I remember I could sketch that entire show that you were on. So I remember it all.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. More from Andy coming up in just a little bit. You might remember earlier in the year when the fires were raging in Los Angeles, the Northwestern women's team chose not to travel, so that meant they didn't play against UCLA and USC. Those games never ended up getting rescheduled, and we found out just a few moments ago from the Big Ten Conference, those games will not be rescheduled. Therefore, it will be forfeitures. So both of those games will go down as losses for Northwestern, while USC and UCLA will get wins for those games. And the reason that matters, of course, is this year, the bottom 3 teams in the standings will not make it to the Big Ten tournament, and that very well could have an impact on Northwestern and the teams that do or do not make it in. Brenda Frese has devoted her entire career to being a coach in women's college basketball, and sure enough, she's one of the all-time greats. Highest winning percentage among active coaches. She's right up there at the top. She also just passed the 600 mark for wins at Maryland. Her team is once again a danger to everyone they play in the Big Ten and soon to be the NCAA tournament. And of course, Brenda is good enough to join us now to chat about this team. She is our big interview. Brenda, let's dive right into your roster this year. How do you describe the production you've gotten the last month or so from Sarah Tebiasu?
You know, she's really stepped up and played how she's capable of playing. I think it took her a while, you know, within our system and kind of navigating everything through, but she's been massive. I mean, clearly, you know, since the injury of Bree McDaniel going down and our energy player, you know, Sarah has just really come into form. She's, you know, the ability to shoot the three, you know, be able to get downhill, get to the rim, as well as setting others up, and defensively as well. She's just been a huge piece within our program.
You mentioned the injury to Bree McDaniel earlier. Unfortunately, you guys have been roughed up a little bit more. Sailor Poffenbarger got hurt in her last game. What's the latest on Sailor?
Day to day with a lower leg injury, and you know, gosh, you know, you're talking about two starters in your lineup that are very impactful. And you saw, you know, in the third quarter when Sailor went down at Northwestern, had huge implications, you know, for our team. I mean, she's the glue kind of that puts us all together, but. Injuries are part of the game, unfortunately, and for us, it's just understanding next player up and just continuing to put your head down. And there's no more, you know, no gimmies in our league, so everyone's competing to win, and you've got to be ready to step up and play.
I mean, to be fair, we're not even close to done talking about the injuries you've had to deal with. Cheyenne hasn't been anywhere close to 100%. She got banged up a couple games ago. What's the latest on her?
Yeah, you know, it is. It's tough. And, you know, she's really day to day as well. I would say, you know, we've limited a lot of her practice time with that load. And I mean, probably somewhere around 65, 70%. So, you know, again, she's an explosive player that can do so much. So for us, just having her on the floor and finding those moments when we can take advantage, but definitely is not at 100%. But we're hoping, you know, as time goes on, we'll be able to get her there.
So Sellers, Poffenbarger, Bree McDaniel, you mentioned you've limited the practice for Cheyenne. What about during a game? What do you have to do differently during a game? Because injuries have to be at least in the back of your mind.
Yeah, as a staff, we're really trying to, around media timeouts, you know, some of those areas where we can get her a longer extended break. We've gone to our bench, you know, a lot more. You know, we're bringing in a lot more post players, so you know, helps our rebounding. But you know, there's other areas, you know, within that game. So really intentional. I think our bench depth has really been an area that we've really tried to stretch and improve upon. But just trying to be a little bit more creative as a coaching staff.
Let me get a positive thing on Cheyenne. 4 amazing years with you. She made a pretty quick impact right away. Her last home game is coming up in just a handful of days. How do you best describe what Cheyenne Sellers has meant to you and to the team?
Just loyalty in today's day and age, you know, to have a player stick through it time and time again, all 4 years. You know, she has had a lot of different teams and a lot of different classes, and has continued to stay the course. And I can say similar to her game, you know, every year she figured out what was going to allow her to be on the court and be impactful. And that's a sign of a great player. You know, why she's leaving here is one of the best players to come through, and in a lot of areas, scoring and assist and rebounds and you know, putting her mark all across the game.
Let me ask about another player, Kayleen Smichael. You and I talked earlier in the year, and you pointed out how she was so ready to go and embrace the family atmosphere that your program has. Now that we're almost towards the end of the season, how do you describe her first full year there in College Park with you?
I love coaching Kayleen. She's just so competitive. She wants to be elite, and we've been really able to challenge her in so many areas. Like, you start with her efficiency on offense. She's been able to do that. People were more concerned about her being high volume, her ability to stretch, with the three, getting off the bounce, drawing fouls for this team. But what I've really loved is I've challenged her defensively. I've challenged her with her assisted turnovers. And that's an area that she's really intentional about, just being a well-rounded player. So I love that about KK.
We're entering the final week of the regular season. Give me one thing that you want your team to still be better at, something that you hope can improve for the rest of the season.
As coaches, we're never satisfied. So, I'd still say on the defensive end, I think we can control some things a little bit more with our communication. I mean, those are controllables, and being on the same page with our lineups. So, definitely on the defensive end, I still think there's a lot of great work for us to improve on.
Big Ten tournament is coming up starting next week in Indianapolis. No big deal. You've already won 5 of these suckers in your brief time as a member of the Big Ten. This year's going to be different, of course, 15 teams in. What is that upcoming week in Indianapolis going to be like this year in particular?
Wow. You've seen the league and just night in and night out. I think you're going to see that, there could potentially be a lot of upsets because everybody can play and you've got to be able to show it. And, for all of us, we've only had one game where you've played a double. So, more than likely you're going to play a team for the second time. And, everything's going to be on the line. Everyone's fighting for seeding in the NCAA tournament and what that looks like. So I think it's going to be an unreal tournament.
I mentioned you've had great success in the Big Ten tournament. What are some things you learned about the best ways to handle this week? Because it is always good competition. It is a game one day after a game, sometimes one day after a game as well.
Yeah, really, you got to focus on the now. It's a new tournament. Everyone is, undefeated at this point, 0-0 with your record. Anything can happen. So you've got to be able to come in and play the best 40 minutes that are complete and focused. And then you have the ability to march on.
You mentioned the league as a whole being so tough and no gimmies this year. Now that, again, we're almost at the end, it's the first year of 18 teams. What was it like? How different did it feel this year?
I can honestly say in all my years in the conference, this one has been the toughest. Just because every single night, through every team, it didn't matter where they were, positioning. Every team came out and played. You were going to get every team's best shot. And it reminds you of the NCAA tournament. I'm excited to see how the Big Ten does when we get into the NCAAs because it's one game scouts and it prepares you for what that's going to look like if you want to win in advance or lose, you go home. So, just the quality of competition that we've had to face home and on the road and just putting your best of 40 minutes together every single night out.
Yeah, maybe a dozen teams or more from the Big Ten slotted to go to the NCAA tournament this year.
Maybe so.
Yeah. Indiana tomorrow on the road, OSU Sunday to end the regular season. Brenda, always great talking to you. Best of luck. We'll see you in Indianapolis.
All right. Thank you so much.
Well, according to our bracketologist on the women's side, Autumn Johnson, here's what she has for the Big Ten in terms of teams getting in. That's 13. She's got 13 teams getting in, including a 1-seed UCLA and a 2 in USC. Let's talk to her about that right now and bring her in. Autumn, before we get to the bracket in particular, let's focus on the week that's still coming up for us, which includes another incredible matchup of USC and UCLA. The first one was thrilling and lived up to the hype. This one has a lot of potential as well. Is a battle for a 1 seed still on the line here? Like, does USC still have a shot to get a 1 seed?
Absolutely. I think this one comes down to the short-term goal of fighting for the regular season crown, which I know both teams want. And now it's going to be a good double temperature check for, to see how they need to get right before the tournament. But absolutely, I think that they still can be a 1 seed. And with Notre Dame falling recently, that makes things even more interesting. Of course, the job has to be done versus, each other in the second. But the Big Ten tournament provides a golden opportunity. And then you also have to look across the nation, across the board, in the ACC tournament. If Notre Dame can fall, that could be a possibility for both teams. But it's going to get interesting down the stretch for sure within this tournament. And we'll see how it all falls out.
It does feel like a very deep year for one seed potential teams. I mean, the fact that theoretically you could have a USC and UCLA not being a one seed is wild, but there's South Carolina, there's Texas, there's so many teams out there. In the same light, the National Player of the Year race is fascinating because Lauren Betts is absolutely in there. Juju Watkins is probably the favorite, but Paige Beckers could win it in a normal year, and that'd be perfectly fine. Hannah Hidalgo is incredible.
Hidalgo.
Where are you on the National Player of the Year race right now?
It's tough. You mentioned all of those phenomenal names, and I really think, March 2nd and the Big Ten tournament can present an interesting conversation for Juju Watkins and Lauren Betts. Right now, I do feel like Hannah Hidalgo is the front runner, but when you look at it, how Juju Watkins came in versus the number one team in the country, 38 points, 11 rebounds, 8 blocks, you can't ignore that. Yes, there has been a lot of conversation about her efficiency, but when those big time moments comes up, she delivers every single time. She has made such an impact on USC. You put her into the equation and you need her. I look at that, especially when it comes to the Big Ten, a race for the Player of the Year as well with her and Lauren Betts. I like to look at impact, both check off the box, and I like to consider head to head. The fact that she came in and handled business in that fashion, I think she gives everyone a run for her money for sure. But like I said, we still have an opportunity March 2nd to see how Lauren Betts comes out. And then, of course, in the Big Ten tournament, it's wide open right now.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible we could see a split? Or is whoever wins the Big Ten Player of the Year going to be the one who won the national? In other words, it couldn't be one or the other?
Very much a possibility because you also look at their impact on the defensive end too. I think they can also have a conversation and beat DPOY as well because of what they're doing on the defensive end. But both players have made an impact on their team. They are the reason why they are in the conversations for these 1 seeds and 2 seeds, but potentially 2 1 seeds to see how things, like I mentioned earlier, shakes out in the ACC tournament, head-to-heads, all of those things. But yeah, I definitely think we can see both of them share just because of the body of work that they've presented so far this season. It's up for grabs.
Those are the clear top 2 teams in the Big Ten, but it wasn't necessarily that clear, say, a month ago, because Ohio State started the season 20-1. Now, since then, they've gone 3-3. So right now, how do you view the Buckeyes as we get 1 week into the Big Ten tournament and then the NCAA tourney?
Yeah, I'm not pressing the panic button on them just yet. I had an opportunity to go to Ohio State when they played versus Northwestern. And, Kevin McGuff said this has been an up and down season. They have been there in a lot of games. That's been a theme of their season. And I asked why. He said last year we had a more mature group when we had JC Sheldon, Celeste Taylor, Ricky Harris. This year we're working with so many newcomers. And when we're good, we're really good. But we haven't seen this team put together a full 40 minutes yet. There's been so many close calls down the stretch. And you want to play your best basketball at this point in February, heading into the Big Ten tournament. And right now, looking big picture, I have Ohio State as a 4 seed. It is necessary, must-win games on the line when they take on Michigan State and Maryland because of the fact they're in danger of losing their hosting rights. So they have to make a deep run. They have to take care of those 2 games in front of them. That gives them a major opportunity for some quad 1 wins as well. So if they want to play at home, they got to get the job done.
There was a while when it wasn't a big 2 or a big 3, but it was a big 4 in the Big Ten because Maryland started off the season 17-0. Now, they lose Bree McDaniel to an injury. They've had Cheyenne Sellers battling injuries. Sailor Poffenbarger got injured earlier as well. So they're a different team now. Where do they stand? Like, how high is their ceiling for an NCAA tournament seed?
Well, we saw last year how Maryland was dead. When I talk about playing your best basketball at the right point of the season, Brenda Frese, one thing she can do is put a team together and execute. We saw that last year in the Big Ten tournament. The reason they were able to make such a deep run and solidify their spot in the NCAA tournament, I think, what they bring in with Cheyenne Sellers and also just the ability to have Kayleen Schmeichel, now that depth, Sailor, Poffenberger as well. They have the right pieces at this point of the season. And right now, they could have that potential as a 5 seed, as a 6 seed with what they're doing so far this season. And who knows who they'll come across against in the Big Ten tournament. That could present an incredible opportunity for them. But the way they've been doing it is on the defensive end and on the offensive end as well. When both are clicking, this team is unstoppable. And when things are on the line, I think Brenda Frese has this team set, poised, and ready to compete with the best.
Now, the graphic underneath you says right now your projection is 13. 13 Big Ten teams. I know we're up to 18, but still, that's a remarkable thing, Autumn.
Yeah, it is. It's a testament to the Big Ten right now and the fact that, it's deep, it's dangerous. We've had so many near upsets. Shout out to Iowa challenging UCLA and USC. I think Washington could cement itself in the tournament. They're a bubble team right now, still searching for a signature win. I've said it all season long. I really think this team is a sleeper because of how they have been so close in all of these matchups when they've taken on LSU, only falling by 1 point. They challenged UCLA. They challenged USC. This could be a dangerous team. And as we mentioned on the top of the show, like USC potentially jumping on that one line. They need to beat UCLA. They need to win the Big Ten tournament. They need to see how things shake out in the ACC tournament. We'll see if we get 1 or 2 Big Ten teams, but man, it's just a testament. I can't say that enough of how impressive this conference has been this entire season.
Well, and my last thing for you is those bubble teams. Like right now you've got Oregon as a 9 seed, so not quite on the bubble, but close. Nebraska as a 10 seed. And Minnesota in as an 11. Now, the knock on Minnesota all year is they don't have any quad 1 wins. They still don't have any. They do have a great opportunity on the road against Michigan State in their last game of the year. But how worried should Nebraska and Minnesota fans be right now?
Not too worried. I think they're, solidified in Minnesota, though. You mentioned that Michigan State game would be huge for them to get the job done. And the way they challenge Ohio State is exactly the confidence they need to bring into this one, considering the fact they need that quad 1 win. In Michigan State, I'm not saying they're similar to Ohio State, but they love that press. They love that. They love to be poised under pressure, and they can do it. I think you bring in that same mentality and try to get the job done to have that on your resume. That speaks a lot whenever the selection committee is looking at those type of things. So yes, a great opportunity ahead for Minnesota. I wouldn't press the panic button for Nebraska as well. I think they're cemented in there as well. But Minnesota, Washington still has some work to do. I think they'll be just fine.
Autumn Johnson, a storyline we will continue to follow the next few weeks with you right along. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, here's a look at 2 players who are having great seasons this year. Purdue's Braden Smith and Wisconsin's John Tonje. Their numbers are impressive. Tonje's scoring more. They're both rebounding about the same. Smith getting a ton more assists and some more steals. But again, they've both been important to their teams all year long in multiple different ways. We bring back the man referred to as the Nick Nolte of television analysts. He's Andy Katz. And Andy, when you look at this men's player of the year race, is it down to just those 2 guys, you think?
No. I think they're the 2 at the top of the list. But I guess I don't remember a time where the last week and a half really could have a say. I mean, let me just throw this out at you, Mike. Hypothetically, what if Derek Queen continues to go off and has a great game tonight against Michigan State and is just tearing it up in the last week and a half of the regular season? Should he be considered? Possibly. Will there be another candidate, that emerges over the next weekend or so? Does Vlad Golden or Trey Kaufman-Wren? I don't know. I just don't think it's locked yet. Those are the 2 favorites. Purdue has slipped, though, in the standings. How much does that factor into Braden Smith's candidacy? Tonje has helped Wisconsin rise up to the double bye. Has that helped him move, ahead of Braden Smith? I really do think it's still TBD when we are still a week and a half left in the regular season.
Make the case for John Tonje. Why should he be player of the year?
So John Tonje was at Missouri last year. I think you're familiar with that university. Was hurt. Prior to that, he was at Colorado State. Came in as a transfer. No one knew how productive he would be, how healthy he would be. He took a Wisconsin team that was projected to be toward the bottom, although they almost never do, but still projected to be toward the bottom of the Big Ten, all the way up to possibly being a double bye or even competing for the Big Ten regular season title. He's had games where he scored 41 against Arizona, 31 in the road win against Purdue, consistently scoring in double figures. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, he only had one game where he didn't score. That might have been their game against USC. But for the most part, he's almost been in double figures. I want to say almost all but maybe 3 games this season. I don't have the notes in front of me, but I'm trying to remember with my photographic mind here, Mike, that you were. So he's produced at such a high clip, showed great leadership, and really transformed this Wisconsin team this season.
All right, flip it around. Make the case for Braden Smith.
So Braden Smith, arguably one of the top point guards in the country. His assist-to-turnover ratio, for the most part, has been pretty high. He's had some big games where he's had to be more of the scorer. He's shown much better leadership that he had to do because of the absence of Zach Edey and Lance Jones and Mason Gillis. Early, for a good stretch, they were the best team in the Big Ten. They've certainly slipped back a little bit right in the last 2 weeks. But also, he stepped into this role that, was sort of vacant with the departure of Edey. Preseason player of the year, not always easy to live up to that hype, and for the most part, he has.
So that's the race. You think it's down to those two, but not necessarily only those two. And I think it's interesting you said it's going to come down perhaps to these final 2 weeks of the regular season before something is decided. How close is the race for the Big Ten Men's Freshman of the Year?
So that race I don't think is close. The team, though, the 5, incredibly close. I think Derek Queen is the Big Ten Freshman of the Year. One of the best players in the country, certainly at his position. And at the beginning of the year, it was sort of a lock that it would be Ace Bailey or Dylan Harper. Maybe they'd share it. Came in well at the hype. Slam Magazine, top 3 picks. But Derek Queen has been the most consistent. He is one of the main reasons that Maryland is in double bye, position right now. Potentially still could win the Big Ten. He's dominated his position. So I think he's going to win it. The rest of the team, Bailey and Harper will be on there. Here's where it gets interesting. Jace Richardson right now has to be on that list. He has been phenomenal. Has helped Michigan State ascend to the top spot in the Big Ten. So what does that mean? That means I've given you 4. So for the last spot, does it go to Kasper Siakachonis, who seemed to be a lock early in the year? Does it go to John Mobley from Ohio State, who's had some big shots and some big moments? Earlier in the year, you could have made a case for Zoom Diallo from Washington. But what about Wesley Yates from USC? He's put up some great numbers. So the last spot, my gut is it will go to Yakachonis. But he's now in that 5 position when he was 1 or 2, earlier in the season. I think it's Queen. I think it's Queen, Harper, Richardson, Bailey, Yakachonis. I would not have put them in that order a month ago.
And final 30 seconds here. Don't you think that's kind of the new reality of the all-freshman team or the first team all-Big Ten, is that when you have 18 teams, it's going to be insane. It's going to be so hard to find a clear cutoff line.
Yeah, and that'll be the case for first and second team. I mean, we saw Nick Martinelli. He scored 29 last night in the Northwestern win over Minnesota. He's an all-Big Ten player. Does he make first team? Does he make second team? We'll have to wait and see, but he's got to be recognized in some form or fashion, and we'll see how that all plays out. And yes, that is definitely a product of an 18-team league. But I will say one thing about Jace Richardson. He sort of had a normal projection of a freshman. Was allowed to mature, blossom, get used to this big-time Division I, and now look at him here toward the end of the season. He handled the hype early, didn't have all the pressure, and now look at him. Michigan State's got a chance to win the Big Ten.
Andy, we will see you later on this evening for the top 20 showdown between Maryland and Michigan State. Say hi to our buddies Horowitz and Hummel. Have a great call. We'll talk to you tomorrow, man.
Thank you, Michael.